So this is day 2 playing around with this 722.3. I've done a bit more investigation now. I've stripped down the front pump assembly and decided to get my reseal kit out and fit what I can today. So this front torque converter seal has to come out to replace the torque converter bushing behind it. That was included in my reseal kit. So first thing I did was remove that front seal. It was actually pretty easy. I didn't have to bash on it too much to deform it to get it out. Just prying on it with a screwdriver was sufficient, and that pulled it out. And that gave me access to that bushing. I didn't remove that on camera. But what worked for me was basically splitting it at its joint from the front side, and once it's split there, it comes out very easily. And that was just using a screwdriver and a hammer. I tried also pushing it from the rear, but it just didn't budge. Splitting it worked perfectly, and that's the bushing you can see there with the split that I've created to get it out. And that has never been replaced. It does have a 1990 date code. So the work that's happened on this transmission previously, they did not bother to change that bushing. So I've got the new one with my kit, and I'm going to install it with my press. I like using the press because it goes in dead straight, and basically no effort's required. These are just bits and pieces that I had lying around. That black piece is from a ball joint installation kit, believe it or not. And that socket is the one that actually does the multi-point nut on the transmission flange and differential. And also the rear axle shafts. It's a very handy socket to have. I think I've used it on my press more than anything else. I didn't even need to use the handle initially to push that bushing in. This is just using my fingers on the pump on the press until it got to the bottom. On closer inspection of that bushing, I decided that I could go slightly further. It wasn't completely flush with that top surface. Probably wouldn't matter, but I decided to get the handle out for the press and do it properly. Just that extra 1 to 1.5 millimeters, something like that. The press is one of the most useful tools you can have working on old cars. It's amazing how many things I've used this for. And it does a really good job, as I said. It's really not much risk of damaging things like you would with a hammer and a drift. And of course, no risk of hammering your fingers. That's something I used to do all the time. Now it's not an issue. So that's way better now. I'm very happy with how that bushing is installed. Just like I bought one. So the next step is to install that front seal. And since I've got the press, why the hell not use that as well? This is another piece from a ball joint installation toolkit. Another fabulous Chinese toolkit, but it's been useful. Actually not for its intended purpose, but using the bits and pieces on the press, they've been very useful for things exactly like this. That disc fits perfectly on top of that seal and bottoms out perfectly on top of that pump housing. And here's a closer look. The absolute pleasure of seeing it go in dead straight. That is ridiculously awesome. I did a damn good job, even if I do say so myself. Note that all of these parts have been cleaned off camera. This isn't just a case of disassembling and putting it straight back together. I have cleaned everything, so there's no chance of junk getting inside. Now that I'm reassembling that pump, I'm just getting some transmission fluid on these surfaces that are metal on metal, so it's basically lubricated, ready to go. And those pump gears, thanks to whoever had this apart in the past, they do have witness marks, so I knew exactly how to put them back in, which was how I found them. And it's all moving nice and smoothly. Can never have too much lube. It was then time to install the O-ring that goes around the outside of that oil pump housing. In the kit, there's another one of a similar size, but it's a thinner profile, so you really need to be careful and compare like for like, and make sure you get the right one in there. And then that cover was installed on the pump. Make sure it goes the right way around. It can pretty much only go one way because the bolt holes are offset. You won't be able to assemble it incorrectly. I did notice that there is this bushing in this pump housing. It's not included in my rebuild kit. It's obviously not under the same kind of stress as the torque converter one, which is always running. Anytime the engine is running, it's always got metal on metal. This one does not, obviously, unless the car is being driven around. On every surface before reassembly, where there is an O-ring involved, I did lubricate it, like you see there. And it was just a case of dropping that pump on. And once again, it only goes one way. There's probably a trick to this, but I got it there in the end. I just guesstimated where the holes would be, like so, and pressed it in. Once it's in, you can actually rotate the pump from the front to align the holes anyway, just with a thin screwdriver through the holes. And that's what I noticed right here, is that none of the holes lined up, so I had to make adjustments. Of course, you can try and turn the pump, but then the front plate stays behind. So really, you've just got to use a screwdriver like this. And that worked a treat. Once they were all reinstalled, I did use my torque wrench and tighten them up to 20 Newton meters. I found that figure via a Google search. I still haven't even looked at the service manual on this transmission. I am guilty of that, because I have pulled a few of these apart before, including the one on my blue-black car, so maybe I'm more confident that I should be, but so far it seems pretty damn simple. So that assembly is basically complete, and of course you just want to make sure those pump gears can turn freely, otherwise you have screwed something up, and they did move perfectly. It was then time to get started on that reverse piston. There's an inner and an outer lip seal. Today I have discovered that lip seals are a pain in the backside. Just to actually get the piston installed, that is. Putting the seals in is easy. The way the lip seal is designed, it basically wants to catch when you're pushing the piston back in. But I did a bit of research on YouTube and saw that someone had been using plastic film to actually guide pistons where they need to go without the lip seals getting caught. So I ended up doing the same thing. Of course, the lip seals are all lubricated before installation. Everything in the reseal kit is identified by components of the transmission, so it's pretty hard to screw this up, honestly. There's little bags with each section labelled, and as long as you've used everything in there, you know you're doing the right thing. Of course, there are some seals that are doubled up for various versions of the transmissions, but all in all, today I've got very little left in the 2 bags that I've used, other than stuff that I'm not ready to install yet, and that will come later. Off camera here, I'm just soaking that seal in ATF. And just pressing it into its groove. Now that piston can only go one way. You see that pin at the rear there, that does have a hole that it needs to go into. That stops the piston rotating, obviously, because that would defeat the purpose of it pushing against those friction discs. And here is just some clever repurposing of my home office supplies. I used a transparency as a sleeve to get that middle lip seal to go over the center part. The outer one was easy. I just used my fingernail to guide that in around the edge while pushing it down, and that wasn't a problem at all. The inner one was the one that was giving me all the problems because it was catching on the grooves on that central shaft. And this is a good bodgy way of testing for leaks, because if you hold the port closed, you shouldn't be able to push the piston down. And sure enough, there's no leaks. It was then time to reinstall the piston return springs and the retainer. I did that in the same dodgy manner that I used yesterday, just with my clamp and 2 sockets. It's dodgy, but it works. And I haven't had to buy any special tools yet. If you've seen my videos, you'll know that I'm not a fan of spending money on tools. My tools are some of the crappiest you'll ever see, I'm sure. Such as this clamp is probably the same age as me, handed down by my father, but it still works, so why throw it away? So with that retainer pressed in with the clamp, I then just used my fingers to guide that snap ring into place, and that worked perfectly. And then I just release the clamp after that's clicked in. And that is almost complete. I do just need to install the 2 Teflon seals. They are included in the kit, as you can see there. I'm sure they'll present some kind of nightmare when it comes to pushing that front cover on. Hopefully they don't get damaged, but we shall see. I believe the K1 clutch that they slot into does have a beveled edge, so they probably should just compress when it gets pushed in. So I started with the top one first, and then once that was in, I went ahead and put the bottom one in. As mentioned yesterday, these are brittle, so you have to be careful. Don't stretch them too much, otherwise they will break. It was then time to move on to the K1 clutch. This is pretty easy. It's just a snap ring to get off the front there. And then you can remove the steels and the friction discs. So immediately I noticed that there are small amounts of hot spots. So yeah, this transmission does have some mileage on it. I'm not overly concerned. The thickness is still there. There's not excessive clearance. So I'm actually just going to put this back exactly as it was after I've replaced the seals. I'm sure some people will be horrified at that thought, but I don't care. This transmission worked, and it will work again. So ultimately I'm only going to be using my seal kit in my rebuild kit. The friction materials I'm not going to change. If I happen to find myself needing to rebuild a 722.3 at some stage, I've at least got all of the frictions. It's not like they have a shelf life. So I'll keep those anyway. And I'll just have to buy another seal kit later. So all of the internal seals and the external seals will be changed on this transmission. Because the last thing I want is transmission fluid leaks on my rebuilt Red 124 project. All of these friction discs look pretty damn good. It's just some minor burn marks on those steels. I don't know if that's normal or if that's something to be concerned about, but it sure as hell doesn't look anywhere near as bad as Red's original transmission. That was an absolute disaster. So that rearmost piece was not coming out with my fingers alone. Fortunately, there's a hole perfectly in the right position where you can just gently give it some assistance to come out. So we can see the piston retainer, and I just used once again the same method to remove that. But I did notice that this is not complete with springs. There are 3 spaces missing. Perhaps on the V8 models it does have all springs installed, maybe even different springs. I haven't checked that in the parts manual, but this M104 transmission does not have all springs installed. So my dodgy little trick with the clamp and sockets worked perfectly on this as well. Snap ring removed without much concern at all. Just a word of caution, make sure the clamp or whatever you're using has plenty of extension left in it, because these springs are pretty damn long. And that's now removed. And I can take the clamp off and get these springs out the way. And that's what I was talking about, those springs being so long. I'd actually maxed out the clamp, but yeah, it wasn't really a problem anyway. And just to stop them falling everywhere, I turned it upside down. So we can see the piston now, and that just comes out by hand. Once again, that has an inner and an outer seal. An inner one, as you see there, and an outer one. I did notice that the rubber seals on this one were not very flexible anymore, so this section has obviously never been touched. This is all original. The seals hardly even spring back. Now the late version K1 clutches, you can change the O-ring without using a drill. The housing that it sits in just has a snap ring inside instead of being riveted in place from the rear. However, it is an absolute nightmare to remove that snap ring. I spent a hell of a lot of time trying to get that out. There was no way I was going to be able to video that. I probably spent about an hour on that alone. Trying screwdrivers and lock ring pliers and various things to try and get it out. It does have a flat side at one end and a keyed edge on the other for you to catch onto it with something. I'm not sure what the tool is that they use at the factory to rebuild these, but whatever it is, I don't have it. But I got there in the end just using screwdrivers. And this is the O-ring that was hiding behind it. It was disgusting, absolutely covered in sludgy crap. So yeah, that's absolutely original. And it had a flat edge on it, so it definitely needed to be changed. I haven't actually seen anyone else change these on YouTube. I had to work this out for myself. But yeah, the hardest part of this job today, the hardest thing I've had to do so far, is just removing that snap ring. Everything else is pretty damn easy. So I'm just lubing up that O-ring and pushing it into its groove. Make sure it goes into the lower groove. The upper groove is for the snap ring that we have to reinstall. It'll be interesting when I get onto the K2 clutch. That's the one that will have rivets holding the back half together. They will need to be drilled out and holes tapped for 10mm long little bolts to hold it back together again. And I will be using Loctite. They suggest to use blue and not red Loctite. Obviously, if you ever want to remove it again, it would be handy to not completely destroy it. So that O-ring is now installed. And I can go ahead and start assembling that K1 clutch. So it was then time to get the new seals onto that piston for the K1 clutch. We're just removing the old ones here. No special tools required, I can just pull these out by hand. And then it was just a case of comparing with the seals that came in the kit to make sure I had selected the correct ones. And then it was just reinstalling exactly as it came off. Make sure the lip is facing in the same direction it came off. The theory behind it is that the pressure is getting underneath the lip and pushing against the surface that it's sealing against. If you put it the wrong way, the pressure will actually just bypass the seal and go straight past it. So it can only go on one way, otherwise it won't work. Unfortunately, that also means it's a pain in the backside to install, because it will catch when you're pushing it down. So that's the inner one installed now. Just lubing up the outer one, and that can get installed now as well. These cocktail glasses are perfect for lubing O-rings. My ex-girlfriend purchased them for me. Little did she know that I don't drink. So yeah, absolutely perfect for ATF and lubricating O-rings. And that's it. I decided to be a bit clever now. Instead of wrestling with that lip seal, I'm going to go ahead and install this as one complete unit. Can't catch on anything if it's not moving. And the inner lip seal goes over much easier. That centerpiece. Unfortunately, you can't see it, but you'll have to take my word for it that worked an absolute treat. Just got to get over the initial resistance of that O-ring, and then it just pops straight in. And of course there is room for the snap ring to go back in once that assembly is all the way home. And of course the piston still moves freely. Just trying to get that outer housing to go the whole way down. And of course it is all lubricated. And I'm just putting in that horrible snap ring back in. Hopefully I never have to take that out again, because that was unpleasant to say the least. I'm not sure this is much of an upgrade versus the old version where you had to drill out the rivets. Probably would be less time consuming drilling out the rivets and threading the holes than having to get that nightmarish snap ring to come out. But that's installed. I can go ahead and reinstall my piston return springs and the retainer. Of course, I made sure that the gaps in the springs were in the same place. On this particular transmission, there is a gap between each 8 springs. All very exciting stuff. Just make sure it's where it was. Getting this retainer to go back in was a bit of a pain, but yeah, if you use 2 hands you can get them to go in properly. And with this compressed with my crappy setup, I just pushed on that snap ring until it clicked in. And that's pretty much assembled now. And I then just dropped the entire stack of clutches as they were back in. Because I don't want to touch them, I don't want to change them. Obviously, if the transmission was in worse condition, if there was excessive clearance, then it would be a different story, but I want to let it go and see how it performs. So these are the seals that I've gone through today in my reseal kit. Next weekend I'm going to venture further into the transmission and reseal more assemblies. So I will be back next weekend. That's enough for this weekend though.